You can be talented, smart, even kind, and still, people don't take you seriously. You start speaking, and before you can even finish, someone else jumps in. Not aggressively, not intentionally, not always with bad manners. It just happens, like your words didn't carry enough weight to hold the room. And the hardest part is, you notice it. You always notice it. You notice the way people look away while you're still talking. You notice the way someone checks their phone right when you begin making your point. You notice the way your idea gets brushed aside until someone else says the same thing with a little more confidence, a little more authority, a little more certainty. And suddenly, the room listens. And somewhere inside, a small voice says, maybe it's me. Maybe I don't have that presence. Maybe I'm not impressive enough. Maybe people just don't see me that way. And that thought quietly starts shaping how you show up. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah is not lazy. She is not careless. She is not average. In fact, she is good at what she does. She prepares, she thinks deeply, she notices what other people miss. She cares about doing things right. She is the kind of person who will sit with an idea long after everyone else has moved on. She sees patterns, she connects dots, she has depth. But in meetings, something feels off. She shares an idea, and the room goes quiet. Not the respectful kind of quiet, the awkward kind. The kind where people technically hear you, but don't fully receive you. Then, 5 minutes later, someone else says almost the same thing, maybe with a lower voice, maybe with a cleaner sentence, maybe without apologizing before they speak, maybe without that tiny upward tone at the end that makes a statement sound like a question. And suddenly, someone says, "That's actually a great point." And Sarah just sits there, slight smile, slight confusion, tiny heartbreak, thinking, wait, didn't I just say that? But she doesn't say it out loud because she doesn't want to seem difficult. She doesn't want to sound insecure. She doesn't want to make the room uncomfortable. So she swallows it again and again and again. And in that moment, something physical happens. She feels the heat rise in her neck. Her thumb digs into the side of her pen. Her stomach tightens. Her breathing gets shallow. And it's not just that her idea was ignored. It's the deeper realization that somehow she has become a background character in her own life. Because the painful part is not only that someone else got the credit, the painful part is wondering why the room believed them more. Same idea, different person, different energy, different result. And that is where the invisible trap begins. Because Sarah starts thinking the problem is her intelligence, but it isn't. She starts thinking the problem is her worth, but it isn't. Very often, the problem is not the idea. It is the signal around the idea. Because there is a difference between asking energy and stating energy. Asking energy sounds like, maybe we could try this? I don't know if this makes sense. This might be a bad idea, but sorry, just adding a small thought. Even when the idea is brilliant, the energy around it says, I'm not fully sure this deserves space. But stating energy sounds different. It says, here's what I'm noticing. One way to approach this is, this could solve the problem in a cleaner way. I want to put this on the table. Same room, same person, same idea. but the signal is different. One sounds like it is asking for permission. The other sounds like it belongs in the conversation. And this is why Sarah's idea gets ignored, but someone else gets praised for saying the same thing. It was not always because they were smarter. It was not always because they had a better idea. Sometimes they simply carried the idea with more ownership. They didn't place a question mark where a full stop was needed, and people heard the certainty before they heard the content. The second person did not necessarily have a better thought. They had more vocal conviction. They spoke like the sentence already belonged in the room. They didn't rush. They didn't soften the beginning. They didn't look around for approval after every few words. They didn't end a strong point like they were asking for permission. And people responded to that, not because it was fair, but because humans are constantly reading signals. Before they process your words, they process your certainty. Before they evaluate your idea, they evaluate your energy. Before they decide whether to listen, they subconsciously ask, does this person believe what they are saying? And if the answer feels unclear, the room becomes unclear too. So Sarah starts trying harder. She prepares even more. She speaks more clearly. She dresses better. She tries to sound more confident. She watches videos on body language. She reads about communication. She practices how to introduce herself. But still, something inside feels shaky, because now it's not just about being seen. It's about proving something. And proving energy is heavy. You can feel it in the body. The shoulders become tight. The voice becomes rushed. The smile becomes slightly forced. The words become too careful. You are no longer simply expressing yourself. You are performing worthiness. And that is exhausting, because every room starts feeling like a test. Every conversation becomes a chance to be validated or silently rejected. Every interruption feels personal. Every ignored idea feels like proof that maybe you are not as powerful as you hoped you were. And this is where it gets quiet. Not outside, inside. Because outside, you may still be smiling. You may still be showing up, still replying professionally, still doing the work, still looking fine. But inside, the dialogue begins. Maybe I'm just not that person. Maybe some people are born with presence. Maybe I'm not meant to be a leader. Maybe I don't have that kind of voice. Maybe this is just who I am. And slowly, without even realizing it, you start shrinking, not physically, but energetically. You speak only when you are completely sure. You soften your opinions before sharing them. You say, I may be wrong, but even when you are not wrong. You say, this might be a silly idea, before sharing an idea that is not silly at all. You laugh a little after making a serious point so it doesn't feel too heavy. You use too many words to make one simple point. You explain, then explain your explanation, then apologize for taking time. And the room may not consciously know what is happening, but it feels it. It feels that you are asking for permission to occupy space. This is what I call the shrinking habit. It begins as protection. Your brain says, last time we spoke up, it hurt. Last time we were ignored, it felt humiliating. Last time we were dismissed, we felt small. So next time, let's be safer. Let's speak less. Let's risk less. Let's not sound too sure. Let's not take up too much room. Let's not invite rejection. And at first, that feels like safety. But over time, it becomes invisibility. You think you are avoiding embarrassment, but you are also avoiding impact. You think you are protecting yourself from being judged, but you are also training people not to look to you for leadership. You think you are being humble, but sometimes what we call humility is actually fear wearing polite clothes. And this is the part nobody teaches us. People don't only respond to your talent. They respond to your energy around your talent. They respond to how you carry what you know. They respond to your relationship with your own voice. Because before your words arrive, your presence has already entered the room. The way you walk in, the way you hold eye contact, the way you sit, the way your hands move, the way you pause before speaking, the way you don't rush to fill silence, the way you allow your sentence to land. These things speak first, before you say a single word. We like to believe people judge us only by our character, only by our intelligence, only by our work. But in real life, people are constantly reading status signals. Not status as in money, not status as in title, status as in internal placement. Where do you place yourself in the room? Do you enter like someone who belongs there? Or do you enter like someone hoping nobody questions why they are there? There is also something called the spotlight effect. It is the feeling that everyone is noticing your flaws, your awkward pause, your nervous hands, your face, your voice, your body, your one wrong word, your one uncomfortable moment. You think everyone is watching you closely, but most of the time, they are not analyzing you that deeply. They are busy thinking about themselves, their own impression, their own performance, their own insecurities, their own place in the room. But even though they are not studying every tiny flaw, they are still reading your signals. They may not notice the exact reason, but they feel the energy. They feel whether you are calm or rushed, grounded or scattered, certain or apologetic, present or trying to disappear. So the goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to stop acting as if one imperfect moment has the power to erase your value. Because presence does not come from flawlessness. Presence comes from self-permission, the permission to pause, the permission to speak, the permission to be seen without performing perfection. High status energy is not arrogance. It is not domination. It is not being loud. It is calm. It is slower movement. It is fewer unnecessary words. It is direct eye contact without begging. It is speaking without rushing. It is being comfortable with silence. It is the ability to make a point and not immediately rescue people from the weight of it. Low status energy is not weakness. It is often just fear. It is fidgeting. It is over-smiling. It is speaking too quickly. It is over-explaining. It is making your statement sound like a question. It is looking around after you speak to check if the room approves. It is shrinking your own words before anyone else gets the chance to. And here is the uncomfortable truth. People don't ignore you only because they don't value you. Sometimes they ignore you because your body, voice, and energy are quietly signaling, "I'm not fully sure I deserve this space." And people respond to that signal, not always consciously, but they do. You have seen this. There are people who are not the smartest in the room, not the most qualified, not even the most thoughtful, but somehow, when they speak, people listen. Why? Because they feel certain, and people trust certainty. Not always because certainty is right, but because certainty feels safe. Humans are drawn to people who seem anchored within themselves. There is an ancient story that explains this better than any modern confidence book ever could. A story about a man standing in the middle of chaos. Noise, pressure, fear, responsibility. His name was Arjuna, and Arjuna was not weak. That is important to understand. He was not a confused beginner. He was not someone without skill. He was not someone who lacked training. Arjuna was one of the greatest warriors of his time, disciplined, focused, gifted, respected. He had spent years mastering his craft. His hand knew the bow. His mind knew strategy. His body knew battle. From the outside, he looked ready. But when the real moment came, when he stood on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, everything inside him collapsed. Because suddenly, the battle was not just a battle, it was personal. In front of him were not faceless enemies. They were his teachers, his relatives, people he had grown up respecting, people connected to his memories, his identity, his emotions. And in that moment, the great warrior froze. His hands trembled, his bow slipped, his mouth went dry, his mind became clouded. He looked at the situation and thought, how can I do this? What if this destroys everything? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I fail? What if the cost is too high? And isn't that what happens to us too? Not on a battlefield maybe, but in boardrooms, in interviews, on stages, in relationships, in creative decisions, in moments where we are required to show up fully. We may have the skill, we may have prepared, we may know what needs to be said, but when pressure arrives, we freeze. Not because we are incapable, but because the mind gets trapped in fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing approval, fear of not being enough. And just like Arjuna, we start focusing on everything that can go wrong. This is where Krishna enters the story, not as someone who magically removes the battle, not as someone who says, "Don't worry, this will be easy," not as someone who promises comfort. Krishna does something much deeper. He helps Arjuna see clearly. He reminds him of who he is. He reminds him of his dharma, his duty, his role, his inner responsibility. Not duty in a harsh, burdened way, but duty as alignment, the thing that is yours to do, the action that belongs to your values, your truth, your position in that moment. Krishna does not tell Arjuna, fight because people are watching. He does not say, win so people respect you. He does not say, prove that you are powerful. He tells him to act from clarity, to do what is right without being obsessed with the result. This idea is known as Nishkama karma, action without attachment to the outcome. And at first, that sounds spiritual, but it is also deeply practical. Because when you are attached to the outcome, people can feel it. When you are attached to being liked, you become careful. When you are attached to being praised, you become tense. When you are attached to being seen, you start performing. When you are attached to being respected, you start chasing respect. And the more you chase it, the more your presence weakens. But when you shift your attention from the result to the action itself, something changes. You stop asking, will they approve of me? And you start asking, what is the right thing for me to say here? You stop asking, will this make me look impressive? And you start asking, what value does this moment need from me? You stop asking, will I be seen? And you start asking, am I standing in truth? That is not passivity, that is power. Because now your energy is no longer dependent on the room's reaction. This is the perception hack hidden inside Nishkama karma. When you are desperate to be seen, you look uncertain. When you are desperate to be respected, you look like you need permission. When you are desperate to prove yourself, people sense the pressure. But when you are focused only on the value of the message, you become steady. Your body relaxes. Your voice settles. Your words become cleaner. Your pauses become stronger. You no longer sound like someone trying to be important. You sound like someone who has something important to say. That is weighted presence, not loud presence, not aggressive presence, weighted presence. The kind of presence that makes people lean in. The kind of presence that does not beg for attention, but receives it. The kind of presence that says, I am not here to dominate the room. I am not here to disappear either. I am here to stand in what is mine to do. And that is the shift. The situation did not change. The battlefield was still there. The pressure was still there. The people were still there. The stakes were still high. But Arjuna changed. Not because his fear disappeared completely, but because his focus shifted. Instead of asking, what if I fail? He began to ask, what is mine to do here? Instead of asking, what will people think of me? He asked, what does this moment require from me? Instead of trying to feel confident first, he aligned with his responsibility. And from that alignment, confidence began to return. That is a powerful lesson, because most of us think confidence comes first. We think, once I feel confident, I will speak. Once I feel ready, I will show up. Once people validate me, I will take space. Once I look powerful, I will act powerful. But often, confidence does not come before action. Confidence comes after alignment, after you remember why you are there, after you stop making the moment about your insecurity and start making it about your contribution. That is when your energy changes, your body changes, your voice changes, your presence changes. And this is where it becomes real for you, because this is not just philosophy, it is practical. The next time you walk into a room, whether it is a meeting, a shoot, a presentation, a gathering, a difficult conversation, or even a room full of people you admire, pause for a second. Before asking, how do I look? Ask, what value do I bring here? Before asking, will they like me? Ask, how can I serve this moment honestly? Before asking, am I impressive enough? Ask, what truth do I need to stand in? Notice what happens. Your shoulders shift, your breath settles, your voice slows down. You stop rushing to prove something. You stop performing confidence. You start embodying clarity. And clarity has weight. Clarity makes people listen differently. Not because you became louder, but because you became anchored. Here is a simple way to practice it. Before you enter an important room, ask yourself 3 questions. What is my role here? What is the one valuable thing I can contribute? And what would I say if I didn't need approval? That 3rd question matters because approval changes language. When you need approval, you over-soften. You say, sorry, just a small thought. Maybe this is wrong. I don't know if this makes sense. This might be stupid, but... And yes, sometimes humility is beautiful. But when humility becomes self-erasure, it stops being beautiful. It becomes a habit of making yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable. Try this instead. Replace "sorry, just a small thought" with "I have a thought." Replace "maybe this is wrong" with "another way to look at this is." Replace "I don't know if this makes sense" with "here's the connection I'm seeing." Replace "this might be stupid, but" with "I want to put this on the table." Feel the difference? You are not becoming arrogant. You are simply removing the apology from your existence. The second practical shift is your pace. Most people rush when they feel unseen. They try to squeeze the full value of their thought into the smallest possible window, because deep down, they don't trust that the room will give them space. So they speak faster, they breathe less, they over-explain. And the faster they speak, the less weight their words carry. But when you slow down, even slightly, you send a different signal. You tell the room, "I am not afraid of taking this moment. I am not panicking through my own point. I believe this sentence deserves space." And the third shift is silence. Most people fear silence, but people with presence use silence. They let a point land. They do not immediately cover it with nervous laughter. They do not rush to explain why they said it. They do not weaken the sentence after saying it. They allow the room to meet the weight of their words. That is how you stop sounding like you are asking to be taken seriously, and start sounding like someone who already takes themselves seriously. There is a very big difference between trying to be seen and standing in who you are. Trying to be seen often carries desperation. Standing in who you are carries dignity. Trying to be seen says, "Please notice me." Standing in who you are says, "I am here. I have value. I don't need to fight for permission." And people feel that. They may not have language for it, but they feel it. The second deeper shift is detachment. Not indifference, not coldness, not pretending you don't care. Detachment means freedom from needing approval to know your own worth. Because when you need respect, people feel it. When you are secretly begging to be taken seriously, people feel it. When every sentence carries the hidden question, "Was that good enough?" people feel it. And strangely, they respect you less. Not because you are less valuable, but because you are handing them the authority to decide your value. But when you stop chasing respect and start standing in your space, something changes. You no longer speak to impress. You speak to express. You no longer enter rooms hoping to be chosen. You enter knowing you have something to contribute. You no longer confuse silence with rejection. You allow your words to land. You no longer panic when someone disagrees. You stay steady. You no longer over-explain your worth. You demonstrate it. Quietly, consistently, powerfully. This is what Arjuna's story teaches us. Not that life will become easy. Not that people will always understand you. Not that every room will immediately respect you. but that your power cannot depend on how the room reacts. Because if your confidence depends on applause, you will collapse in silence. If your worth depends on being praised, you will shrink when ignored. If your presence depends on approval, you will keep adjusting yourself until you no longer recognize who you are. But if your presence comes from alignment, from knowing what is yours to do, then even in chaos, you can stand. Even in doubt, you can speak. Even when people don't immediately see you, you don't abandon yourself. So if you have ever felt ignored, overlooked, interrupted, underestimated, unseen, there is nothing wrong with you. You were not born without presence. You were not born without power. You were not born to stay in the background. Maybe you were just never taught how to carry your value. Maybe you were taught to be polite but not powerful, kind but not clear, talented but not visible, humble but not self-abandoning. And now you get to learn, not to become someone else, but to return to yourself with more weight, more clarity, more calm, more truth. Because being seen differently does not always start with changing your clothes, your voice, your title, or your face. Sometimes it starts with one quiet shift inside. I am not here to prove my worth. I am here to offer my value. And the moment you understand that, the way you walk changes. The way you speak changes. The way you hold silence changes. The way people experience you changes. Because you are no longer asking the room to give you permission to matter. You already know you do. So the next time you feel unseen, pause and ask yourself, am I truly invisible, or have I been standing like I need permission to be seen? And maybe the deeper question is this: are you waiting for the world to notice you, or are you waiting for permission to exist?